Welcome to lesson 1.2. Here we are going to work on adding integers. And the learning target is very simple. It is to find the sum of integers. We just need to remember that integers are any whole numbers that are positive and negative and zero. Okay? One way to find the sum of integers is to use a number line. And I'll show you a couple examples here. If the problem is right here, we need to find what a positive 4 plus a negative 4 is. I think right away we can kind of see that if you have a positive 4, then you have a negative 4, and you put those together, you have nothing. But let's use the number line. If we start at 0, and we have a positive 4, so we add it to 4, okay? That's this one right here. And then we're going to take 4 away. And then we go here, and we're right back to where we started. Let's try this next one. It has a negative 1 plus a negative 3. So what we want to do is we want to start at 0, and we want to go to this negative 1. So we go here, and then we have to add another negative 3. So we go 1, 2, 3, and that takes us all the way to negative 4. So a negative 1 plus a negative 3 equals negative 4. Let's do one more here. If I have a negative 2, okay, we're going to start at 0. We'll go down 2. That takes us to negative 2. And then we have to add 6. So we go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And that puts us at 4. Let's do these triads. If I have a negative 2, I start at 0. I go down 2, which takes me to negative 2. But then I have to go up 2, because it's a plus 2. It's going to take me right back to 0. So a negative 2 plus a 2 equals 0. Now, a number 2, I start at 0, and I go down, nope, that was wrong. This is a positive 4. So I go up 4. And then I need to add a negative 5. So I'm going to start at 4 here, and I got to go down. So down 4 takes me to 0, and then I got to go down a whole nother 1, which is going to take me to negative 1. So if you start with 4 and you take away 5, you're at a negative 1. Number 3, I have a negative 3 plus a negative 3. I start at 0, and I go down to a negative 3, and then I have to go down 3 more. So negative 3 more takes me to a negative 6. So a negative 3 plus a negative 3 equals a negative 6. There's a key idea I want to lift up when you're adding integers. So there's the whole idea of adding integers with the same sign. So by sign, I mean either negative or positive. So if they're both positive, that's what you've been doing since kindergarten. You know, it's this whole thing. 2 plus 5. You have a positive 2 and you're adding a positive 5. So 2 plus 5 is 7. And now this other way, or maybe a kind of a newer thing that we're introducing here, is where you're adding negative numbers. So on this one, you have a negative 2, and you're adding it to a negative 5. And when you do that, like we saw in the number line, you start at 0, go to negative 2. So that's where you've done negative 2. And then you add another negative 5, so you go negative 5 more. And so you get to negative 7. When you add things with the same sign, all you got to do is find the absolute value of the integer and then use the common sign. So absolute value of 2 is 2, absolute value of 5 is 5. So 2 plus 5 is 7. And the common sign of both of those is positive, so we have a positive 7. Absolute value of negative 2 is 2. Absolute value of negative 5 is 5. You add those two together. 2 plus 5 is 7. And then you use the common sign, which in this case is negative. So it is a negative 7, which we have right there. All right. Adding integers with the same sign is pretty straightforward. Now, if we add integers with a different sign, okay, so one's a positive and one's a negative. You want to subtract the lesser absolute value from the greater absolute value, then use the sign of the integer with the greater absolute value. All right, that's kind of a lot to think about. But let's find the absolute value. So absolute value of 8 is 8. Absolute value of negative 10 is 10. So once we get that, then it says to subtract the lesser absolute value from the greater. So let's take 8 away from 10. And when we take 8 away from 10, we get 2. Then it says use the sign of the integer with the greater absolute value. So 10 has the greater absolute value, so then we're going to use that negative sign. All right. Let's do the next one. So we have negative 13 and positive 17. So I want to get the absolute value. Negative 13 is 13. Absolute value of 17 is 17. I take the smaller away from the bigger, so that gives me a 4. And then I have to figure out which one has a bigger absolute value. Well, the 17 is bigger, and it's a positive, so my answer is 4. Okay. Now, there is something called the additive inverse property. And that's a big word, a big kind of idea just to say the sum of a number and its additive inverse, or its opposite, is always 0. So if you have a 6 plus a negative 6, you're going to have 0. If you have a negative 25 and you add its opposite, which is a positive 25, you're going to get to 0. So whatever you have and you add its opposite, you will have 0. All right. Here's another example of adding them with the same sign. So I have a negative 4 here plus a negative 2. So they're both negatives. So once I find the absolute value of each of those, which absolute value of negative 4 is 4, absolute value of negative 2 is 2, I add those together. 4 plus 2 is 6. And then I use the sign that is common to both of them, which is a negative, and it gets me to a negative 6. If you have negative numbers and you add them together, you're going to have a negative number. If you have positives and you add them together, you're going to have a positive. Let's do the triad here. We have 7 plus 13. That's something you've done for a long time. It's 20. They have the same sign. It's positive. Okay, next one, you have a negative 8 plus a negative 5. I know that the absolute value of negative 8 is 8. Absolute value of negative 5 is 5. I add those together, gets me 13. I got to go with the common sign, which is negative. So a negative 8 plus a negative 5 is a negative 13. Number 6 is very similar to that. You have a negative 2 and a negative 15. I get my absolute value of both of those, which is 2 and 15. Add those together, which is 17. And then I use the common sign, and I get a negative 17. Adding integers with different signs, here's where we have to think a little bit more. So in example number 3, we have 5 plus negative 10. and we want to find the absolute value of both of those. So we find this is 5 and this is 10, and then you take the smaller away from the bigger, so you take 5 away from the 10. It leaves you with 5, and then you have to see which one is greater absolute value. Well, this 10 is greater, so that's the sign we're going to use. So it ends up being a -5, which makes sense also. If you have 5, say you deal with like temperature. Say the temperature goes up from 0 to 5 degrees, and then it goes down 10. You're going to lose all of your positive degrees, plus you're going to go 5 more, and it's going to be a -5. Okay. B, -3 plus 7. Absolute value is 3 plus 7. And so what you want to do is you want to take the smaller away from the bigger. So 7 take away 3 is 4. And then I have to figure out which one is bigger. This absolute value 7 is bigger, so that's the sign I'm going to use, and it's a positive, so it's 4. All right. C is the additive inverse property. We have a -12 adding a +12, so you're adding opposites, -12, +12. When you add opposites, you always get 0. Let's try it. All right, number 7. You have a -2 plus 11. I have the absolute value of -2 is 2, and absolute value of 11 is 11. We're going to take the smaller away from the bigger, so we take 2 away from the 11. It gives us 9. And then which one has a greater absolute value? Well, this 11 does, and it's positive, so the answer is a +9. Number 8. We have 9 plus a -10. Absolute value is 9. Absolute value is 10. We take the smaller away from the bigger. It leaves us with 1. This one has a greater absolute value to it, so we're going to use the negative. So the answer is -1. And then 9, we have a -31, adding a +31. You're adding the opposite. So it is the additive inverse property. -31 plus a +31 equals 0 every time. This is important. In real life, we always are adding and subtracting integers. And so here's a real life kind of problem. The list shows 4 account transactions, and we need to find the change of the account balance. So we have 2 things here. We have a withdraw and a deposit. When you deposit money into account, you're adding it to your account. When you withdraw, you're taking it away. So a withdraw is like a negative. So those are my 2 negatives. So if I look at these as a whole, I'm going to take my negatives and add those together. So I have a -40 plus a -50. And when you add the same sign, you just add the absolute value and include the sign. So 40 plus 50 is 90, and it's a negative. So in those July transactions, the 2 withdrawals, I took out $90. So that's a -90. Now, the deposits are adding. So I'm adding this 50 and this 75. That's how much I put in there. So that's a positive. So when I take 50 plus 75, it gets me 125. So I added 125 into my account, and I took out 90 in that month. So we want to see where we end up. And the way we're going to do that is by adding them. So -90 plus 125. And we just need to find the absolute value of each of those. Absolute value of -90 is 90. Absolute value of 125. These are different signs, so we have to take away the smaller one. And that leaves us with, it says 125, take away 90. this up. Oops. I can't do that. Okay. Take away 90 from 125. That leaves me with 35. So it's a 35. Now, absolute value, which one's bigger? This 125 is bigger, and it's a positive. So we ended with a positive $35. And that is the change in the account, which makes sense because you can see that you deposited more money than you took out. And so you should have a positive amount, and $35 is what you have. We'll do a little self-assessment here. We're gonna do 11, 12, 13, and then we'll do 14 and 15 and 16. Okay, so if you want to pause the video and do those, and then you can come back and watch me do them and see how you did. All right. Number 11, we have a -8 plus 20. They're different signs, so I take the absolute value of each of those. It's 8 and 20. I take away the 8 from the 20, it leaves me with 12. And then I have to decide what sign am I going to use. Well, the greater absolute value is this 20, which is a positive, so it is 12 for that one. -8 plus 20 is 12. Looking at 12, we have a 30 plus a -30. Those are just opposites. And when you add the opposites, you always end up with 0. Number 13, you have a -10 plus a -18. Those have the same sign. So all we have to do is we have to add the absolute values of each of those and include the same sign. So 10 plus 18 is 28. And the sign that both of them have is negative. So my answer is a -28. Okay. Number 14, number sense. Is 3 plus -4 the same as -4 plus 3? All right, well, let's try this. Okay, I have a 3 plus a -4. I take the absolute values of both of those. It's 3 and 4. Take away the smaller one, so it leaves me with 1. And the bigger absolute value is this -4, so it's a -1. Now let's see if that's the same as -4 plus 3. So they're opposite signs. Absolute values is 4 and 3. I take away the 3 from 4, leaves me with 1. Which one has a bigger absolute value is the negative, and so it'd be a -1. These are the same. We will get into later some different properties. The cumulative property of addition will tell us that no matter what you add first or second, however you add the two, as long as you're adding them, they will always be the same. Okay, and we'll talk more about that later. Let's look at a couple of logic. Tell whether the statement is true or false. The sum of two negative integers is always negative. Now, we know that to be true. And why is that true? Because you take the absolute value of both of them and always include the sign. So it's always going to be a negative sign. So the sum of an integer and its absolute value is always 0. That I don't think is going to be true. Let's try that. The sum of an integer, let's say the integer is 5, and its absolute value, and we're going to add its absolute value. What's the absolute value of 5? 5. 5 plus 5 is 10. That's not 0. Now, if you would say, then if you have a negative number and you add its absolute value, which is its opposite, that is going to be 0. But because you just say any old integer, Not true. It's only true if you start with a negative integer. I want to end this video with a little assignment for you. This last self-assessment is for problem solving, which is so critical. So there's two questions. There's a number 17 and 18. And I love the ones that say dig deeper. They're a lot more difficult. They challenge you a little bit more. So I'd like you to spend some time trying to work on number 17 and 18. And we will go over those in class tomorrow. If you get completely stuck, don't worry about it. We're going to go over them and we'll talk through them and I'll help you to understand. But I want you to give it a good try. Maybe work at it for 5 or 10 minutes. Give it a go. See what you can do.